Good evening and welcome. This is my first attempt at. Hold on. I'm trying to set up the camera. I should have probably done it before I started the video, but we do what we can. Figure it out. Hold on. This is just video production behind the scenes. Don't want to over. Okay. Hopefully I'll delete that when I convert this into my YouTube share, which is ultimately what I'm going to be doing. But yeah, welcome to my bedroom. And it's stable. Okay. So, I wanted to read to you from this book I got from a very sweet friend of mine. And the title is very intense, as it says in the part where I typed it in. Anyways, Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors, Overcoming Internal Self-Alienation by Janina Fisher. Now, a book with this kind of title pretty much like hurts you to look at it. Like, if you're a trauma survivor, it's just like brutal to read a book like, oh, let's get into healing right away. But I'm gonna work past it. I'm just gonna read it straight through until something happens and I decide not to. Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors integrates a neurobiologically informed understanding of trauma, disassociation, and attachment with a practical approach to treatment, all communicated in straightforward language accessible to both client and therapist. Readers will be exposed to a model that emphasizes resolution, a transformation in the relationship to oneself, replacing shame, self-loathing, and assumptions of guilt with compassionate acceptance. Its unique interventions have been adapted from a number of cutting-edge therapeutic approaches, including sensory-motor psychotherapy, internal family systems, mindfulness-based therapies, and clinical hypnosis. Readers will close the pages of Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors with a solid grasp of therapeutic approaches to traumatic attachment, working with undiagnosed dissociative symptoms and disorders, integrating right brain to right brain treatment methods, and much more. Most of all, they will come away with tools for helping clients create an internal sense of safety and compassionate connection to even their most disowned selves. Janina Fisher, PhD, is an Assistant Education Director of the Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute, an EMDR International Association, EMDRIA consultant, and a former instructor at the Trauma Center, a clinic and research center founded by Besser van der Kolk. Known for expertise as a clinician, author, and presenter, she is also a past resident of the New England Society for the Treatment of Trauma and Disassociation, a former instructor at Harvard Medical School, and co-author with Pat Ogden of Sensory Motor Psychotherapy, Interventions for Trauma and Attachment. Title page. To my most gifted teachers, all the trauma survivors who gave me a window into their inner worlds, who were my experts, who taught me what always to say and what never to say, and who, to this day, inspire me to find new ways to help them heal at the broken places. A special debt of gratitude to Barbara Watson, who taught me the importance of inspiring instead of treating, laughing instead of crying, holding on to belief when all others have lost hope. and my eternal thankfulness to Camille for being the wind beneath my wings. The quote, the wind beneath my wings, end quote. I will skip over the contents and the list of figures, book stuff, you know, and acknowledgments. That introduction was okay. Oh, no, this is the real introduction. How this book came to be. Having no way to understand the entrenched self-alienation or intense self-hatred of their traumatized clients, therapists often feel frustrated, baffled, and inadequate to the task of trying to help. Why do they seem to be at war with themselves or with us? Although the client has come seeking relief from a burden of trauma-related symptoms and issues, the task of exchanging self-alienation for self-compassion can feel overwhelming or distasteful. Neither client nor therapist has a language with which to explain the internal struggles being played out inside the client's mind and body. In a mental health world that rejects the notion that personality and identity can be fragmented and compartmentalized, therapists are rarely trained to see the splits, much less the life or death battle for control being waged by the selves, with opposite aims and instincts. My intention in writing this book was to share a way of conceptualizing the most complex and challenging clients who come to us often carrying the terminal diagnoses such as personality disorder, bipolar 2, even schizophrenia. Over 3 decades in the trauma treatment field, my compatriots and I have learned about trauma the hard way. By letting clients teach us about their inner worlds, their intrusive, overwhelming symptoms, what it is like to live in a body organized to expect annihilation or abandonment. Lacking approaches specifically tailored to the needs of traumatized clients, all of us winged it, creating new techniques and interventions, seeing what worked, and retaining what we did, either because the interventions were effective or because the clients liked how they felt. In the 1990s, as an instructor and supervisor at Bessel van der Kolk's Trauma Center, I was profoundly influenced by the neuroscience research that began to revolutionize our way of understanding trauma, and by Bessel's belief, the body keeps the score, Van der Kolk, 2014. We began to see the trauma-related disorders not as disorders of events, but as disorders of the body, brain, and nervous system. The neurobiological lens also resulted in another paradigm shift. If the brain and body are inherently adaptive, then the legacy of trauma responses must also reflect an attempt at adaptation rather than evidence of pathology. Through that neurobiological lens, what appears clinically as stuckness and resistance, untreatable diagnoses, or character-disordered behavior simply represent how an individual's mind and body adapted to a dangerous world in which the only protection was the very same caretaker who endangered him or her. Each symptom was an ingenious solution by the body to create some semblance of safety for the developing child or the endangered adult. The trauma-related issues with which the client presents for help, I now believe, are, in truth, a red badge of courage that tell the story of what happened even more eloquently than the events each individual consciously remembers. As I came to be known as an expert in treating trauma, increasing numbers of clients sought me out for consultation, asking, "Why am I not getting better? My therapist and I have a wonderful relationship, but none of my symptoms are diminishing. Am I doing the wrong kind of therapy? Or is there something wrong with me?" Time after time, as I heard from clients and therapists what had been tried and failed, I could not find a mistake or a misguided choice of treatment. More often, what could be seen from the consultant's perspective was something both therapist and client could not see. The client was fragmented. What it had taken to adapt to was splitting of self and identity, sufficiently severe that the individual's inner world had become a war zone. What I also noticed was the relief these clients experienced as I educated them about dissociative splitting as a normal adaptation to trauma. First describing to them the theory of structural dissociation, Vanderhart, 2006. I would then translate their struggles using the language of parts and the language of animal defense survival responses, the cornerstone of structural dissociation theory. Often, as I spoke, I observed a look of recognition on their faces, as if I were telling them nothing new, but simply giving them a language to describe at long last what they already recognized, but had no words to explain. Rather than feeling stigmatized or crazier, the structural dissociation model seemed to be reassuring to them. Its central principle, that splitting had simply allowed them to adapt and survive more successfully in an unsafe world, helped even very proud narcissistic individuals to experience the fragmentation as a validation of their survival, not further proof of their defectiveness. As I worked in this way with a range of clients, it became increasingly clear that when they adopted or came to love their heart, lost and lonely parts, something remarkable happened. Their self-disparagement, self-hatred, and disconnection began spontaneously to yield to self-compassion. Whereas the idea of being nice, taken care of, or being compassionate to themselves was met with disgust and avoidance, every client could be helped to see his or her child parts and to extend kindness and care. As they developed internal attachment relationships to these young selves, I could see them healing. What does it mean to heal is subjective, of course. For some clients, it implies the ability to function again, to simply reclaim their lives. But as I observed the clients who began forming loving attachment bonds to their younger selves, I could see healing at a much deeper level. Seeing them bond with the child they had once been and feeling their shame and self-hatred melt away convinced me that the left brain adult side of each one was capable of relating to the right brain child side, experiencing him or her as innocent and little, spontaneously evoking warmth and protectiveness. By bonding to the lost children inside, their internal states transformed, creating a loving, warm environment that felt safe at last. Best of all, it was evident that this work was not only transformative, but also easy for the clients once they had learned the basic skills needed to form internal attachment relationships to their parts. The book is intended for use by a wide range of therapists and for an even wider range of clients. In writing it, I hoped particularly to address the challenges faced by chronically traumatized individuals, much like those who have sought me out for consultations. These are clients young and old who battle to recover from their legacies of trauma, confused that these have not resolved despite good therapy, effective treatments, supportive relationships, or even rich, full lives in the present. I also wanted to describe an effective and respectful way of working with traumatized clients who have lost their hope and ability to function, or depend upon hospitals, families, and loved ones to care for them as they struggle with self-destructive impulses, driving suicidal, self-harming, addicted, or eating disordered behavior. Despite decades of research attesting to the relationship between early abuse and a later diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, it is rare for clients with borderline diagnoses to be treated as trauma patients or to be recognized as individuals whose borderline symptoms stem logically and tragically from unsafe environments of their early lives. Thanks to enlightened departments of mental health in the states of Massachusetts and Connecticut, I have the invaluable opportunity to try out the treatment model described in this book with some of their most high-risk patients and to find with a treatment model organized around trauma-related splitting and compartmentalization, these patients could begin to stabilize, to live out of institutional walls, and to understand their attacks on the body as a valiant attempt by one part to gain quick, short-term relief from the painful implicit memories of other parts. This book is also meant for traumatized clients who have overcome, who have prestigious jobs and loving families of choice, whose lives are rich and full, but who still struggle to enjoy the quality of life they have fought to create. And the book is also intended to offer hope to individuals who may be stable, but whose internal quality of life is still as dark and painful as the traumatic past, despite the safety, support, and meaningful work in their external lives. The treatment paradigm described in this book is not intended for the treatment of any one particular diagnosis. It is meant to be used on behalf of all survivors of trauma, whether the client carries a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, has been given a common trauma-related diagnosis, such as ADHD, bipolar disorder, borderline personality, or a dissociative disorder, or has never met a mental health professional. If you, the reader, have been failed, attacked, threatened, abandoned, terrorized, abused by other human beings, and if you still carry with you the emotional and physical legacy of those experiences, or if you work to help those who do, I believe this book will speak to you. Fragmentation and Internal Struggles. 10 years ago, in the context of consulting with traumatized clients who came to me as an expert, seeking to understand why they were not making progress in treatment, I began to observe a very characteristic pattern. These clients had something unique in common. Each was superficially an integrated whole person, but had also manifested clear-cut signs of being internally fragmented. They experienced intense conflicts between trauma-related perceptions and impulses. For example, the worst is going to happen. I will be abandoned if I don't get out first. Versus here and now assessments of danger. I know I'm safe here. I wouldn't let my children live in this house if it were not safe. They suffered from paradoxical symptoms. The desire to be kind and compassionate towards others or to live a spiritual life on the one hand, and intense rage or even impulses to violence on the other. Once their conflicts were described, the patterns became more easily observable and meaningful. Each side of the conflict spoke to a different way of surviving the unsurvivable, of reconciling the opposites that are so often part and parcel of traumatic experience. With an explanatory model that described each reaction as logical and necessary in the face of threat or abandonment, and that reframed them as the survival responses of the different parts of the self to which the individual could relate, each client started to make faster, more sustainable progress. The theoretical model that best explained the phenomena they described was the structural dissociation model of Onno van der Hart, Eller and Kathy Steele, 2004. Rooted in a neuroscience perspective and a well accepted throughout Europe as a trauma model, It was a good fit for me as a firm believer and spokesperson for a neurobiologically informed approach to trauma and trauma treatment. The theory describes how the brain's innate physical structure and two separate specialized hemispheres facilitate left brain, right brain disconnection under conditions of threat. Capitalizing on the tendency of the left brain to remain positive, task-oriented, and logical under stress, these writers hypothesized that the disconnected left brain of the personality stays focused on the tasks of daily living, while the other hemisphere fosters an implicit right brain self that remains in survival mode, braced for danger, ready to run, frozen in fear, praying for rescue, or too ashamed to do anything but submit. In each individual client, I could see that some parts were easier to identify with or own, and some parts were easier to ignore or dismiss as not me. Internally, the parts were also in conflict. Was it safer to freeze or fight, to cry for help, or to be seen and not heard? What I also noticed was that the internal relationships between these fragmented aspects of the self reflected the traumatic environments for which they had once been solutions. The left brain dominant, present-oriented self avoids the right brain dominant, survival-oriented parts, or judges them as bad qualities to be modified, while the right brain implicit selves of the parts are equally alienated from what they perceive as a weak or absent other half. The functioning self carries on, trying desperately to be normal, at the cost of feeling alienated from or invaded by the intrusive communications of the parts. The price of self-alienation, a false self. Survivors of abuse, neglect, and other traumatic experiences often report functioning better as a result of their compartmentalization, but then suffer from feelings of fraudulence or pretending. Not realizing that each side of the personality is equally real and necessary from an evolutionary standpoint, clients easily misinterpret the intense, palpable feelings, the feeling memories of the not me child as more real than the experience of the going on with normal life self, doggedly putting one foot in front of the other, or keeping on, even in the face of overwhelming pain. Without an explanatory paradigm that makes sense of these contradictions, there is no way for individuals to know that their intense feelings and distorted perceptions are evidence of fragmentation, not proof of internal defectiveness or fraudulence masked by the ability to function. Over time, self-alienation can only be maintained by most individuals at the cost of increasing greater self-loathing, disconnection from emotion, addictive or self-destructive behavior, and internal struggles between vulnerability and control, love and hate, closeness and distance, shame and pride. While longing to be loved, safe, and welcome, many traumatized clients find themselves alternating between anxious clinging and pushing others away, hating themselves or having little patience with the flaws of others, yearning to be seen and yearning to be invisible. Years later, they present in therapy with symptoms of anxiety, chronic depression, low self-esteem, stuckness in life, or diagnoses such as PTSD, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, even dissociative disorders, unaware that their symptoms are being driven not just by the traumatic events, but by an internal attachment disorder mirroring the traumatic attachment of early childhood. Therapist and client have no framework for understanding the chaos and or stuckness that might may soon elude their best efforts at treatment. Traumatic attachment as a complication in trauma therapy. In the trauma treatment world, in which I have practiced professionally over the past 25 years, generations of best treatment models have been repeatedly challenged by client vulnerability to being triggered by apparently innocuous stimuli, swept into the trauma vortex, and overwhelmed with painful emotions and physiological responses. For some clients, the present feels a little better than the past. Since my postdoctoral fellowship in Judith Herman's clinic in 1991 and arrival at Bessel van der Kolk's Trauma Center in 1995 as supervisor and instructor, my colleagues and I, led by Bessel van der Kolk, have been on a quest to find new methods or interventions that might help free our clients from the insidious impact of the traumatic past. But even as each is an improvement on the last, we always come up somewhat short. Each new understanding or sophisticated treatment method helps some clients we haven't before been able to reach, but it doesn't bring resolution for all. Or each brings relief in some symptoms while not alleviating others. And for some traumatized clients, the course of treatment, even over the long term, seems to consist of 2 effortful steps forward followed by a slide backward, pushing the proverbial boulder up a steep hill this week only to find the next session that it is right back at the bottom again. Even more challenging, some clients find that their trauma-related wishes and fears of relationship are so equally intense that that therapy and the therapist evoke painful yearning, mistrust, hypervigilance, and anger, or fear and shame rather than feelings of safety and comfort. It was my hope in writing this book that the treatment approach described here would create a way for these clients and their therapists to navigate these challenges and resolve them. Stuckness, trauma-related internal conflicts. Often at this point, the client reports feeling worse instead of better, and the therapist begins to question his or her ability. Each wonders, am I doing something wrong? What neither client nor therapist realizes is that stuckness in treatment reflects a trauma-related internal conflicts between fragmented selves being played out on the stage of the psychotherapy. In questioning our ability as therapists or generalizing client behavior as transference or resistance, we miss the opportunity to become witnesses to the reenactment occurring inside the client's fragmented inner world. Not understanding that fragmentation of the personality can result in simultaneous, strongly held, opposing goals such as, I want to die and I am determined to live, or I want to feel connected, but I don't want anyone to know that I care, or I loathe and despise myself. I look up to others above me, and I loathe and despise them when I see that they are not any better than any other authority figure. Although written for the therapists committed to finding ways to better help clients for whom other methods haven't been quite right or complete, this book is also written on behalf of the trauma survivor who comes to therapy as a client. Since the early 1990s, I have been looking for gentler, less re-traumatizing ways of treating the effects of traumatic experience. It never made sense to me that a therapy for those who have been badly hurt should have to cause the same intensity of pain. I've always believed that it was bad enough for my clients to have lost their childhoods or adolescence, but it was absolutely unacceptable to allow the legacy of trauma to deprive them of their adult lives too. And it is felt equally unacceptable that processing trauma should be as frightening and overwhelming as the early experiences themselves, that all subsequent relationships, even the therapeutic ones, should feel as threatening as those in childhood. When we are young, our caregivers have almost total control of our inner worlds and the power to evoke in us both painful and pleasurable emotions, as well as lay down expectancies for how relationships work. When we have survived to adulthood with its promise of autonomy, we finally have the ability to move away from painful experiences, to choose how much or how little to trust, to negotiate boundaries and intimacy. But that's not how survivors of trauma feel. Their bodies still remember the experience of no control over pleasure or pain. My purpose in developing this approach was to describe a way of coming to terms with trauma that felt healing, that spoke to survival, not victimization, that created warm and pleasurable feelings in the body rather than terrifying ones. This book is intended to appeal to clients and therapists working with trauma, attachment disorders, dissociation as these manifest in complex and paradoxical symptoms, alienation from self, internal conflicts, troubled therapeutic relationships or impasses. Therapists are routinely stymied by the effects of self-alienation on the therapy. Shame, punitive self-hatred, separation anxiety, fear of abandonment, self-destructive behavior, inability to self-soothe or self-care, fears of hope, happiness, and compassion for self. Psychotherapist training programs provide little information on traumatic attachment or on how undiagnosed trauma-related fragmentation or splitting can